All right, to begin with our introductions, I'd first like to introduce Claire Kerr, who is the director of Care2, an online social action network with over 50 million members worldwide. She is a data-driven fundraiser who is dedicated to the positive uses of technology in the nonprofit environment. Glad to have you, Claire.
Hi there, how are you?
Doing pretty well. Looking forward to this session.
And hello to the chat.
Also joining us today is Mark Becker, who founded Cathexis Partners in 2008. Cathexis provides technical and consultative services to nonprofits of all sizes and all verticals. He previously served as director of IT consulting at a fundraising event production company focused on nonprofits. For more than 20 years, Mark has supported hundreds of nonprofit online fundraising efforts. Glad to have you, Mark.
Great to be here. Looking forward to it.
Also joining us today is Tony Goodrow, who is the CEO of Better Impact. He is passionate about helping organizations reach their potential and is thankful he gets to do this for a living. Tony is a big believer in the value volunteers bring to organizations and developed the relative impact model of measuring ROI to quantify that value. Glad to have you, Tony. Also with us today is Michael Goriaran, who is the president and CEO of Arjuna Solutions, the leading provider of behavioral economics modeling powered by patented AI, services designed to optimize lifetime giving while lowering the cost per dollar raised. He is an avid distance runner, outdoor enthusiast, and an active parent of 2 with his wife, Chris. Glad to have you, Michael.
Thanks, Colleen. Hello to everybody.
All right, we are going to jump in and get started. And Claire, I'm going to have you start us off with our very first question. What are some emerging trends and innovations in nonprofit technology, and how can nonprofits stay ahead of the curve to improve their impact and efficiency?
Oh, awesome. I get the first question. Am I first in the Brady Bunch squares? Is that the way it works?
Yes. Yes.
High to the up and below. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about, obviously that is such a huge question, right? Because you could be, oh, AI, you could talk about contactless payments, you could talk about innovations in merging your direct mail along with your digital outreach and all of that. Rather than get too into the weeds, one thing I'm going to talk about that I think is going to be really well represented at the conference I'm currently at in Denver, which is the Nonprofit Technology Network Conference. And if anybody is going tomorrow or is currently here, go ahead and put in the chat. And a great conference. One big trend that I think is going to be huge for nonprofits this year is focusing on retention and reactivation of your current constituents. So obviously there are a lot of technology solutions that can help you do that, but the overall goal being remembering, in addition to acquisition and in addition to sort of your programmatic outreach, really thinking about how we can go back to the people who already love us, who are our warmest leads, our warmest supporters, our most efficient cost-wise to reactivate folks, and thinking about how we can better serve them. We know it is more cost-effective to reactivate somebody than it is to acquire somebody. Not that we're not going to acquire folks, but the reason I think it's a huge trend, especially on the digital side, is that most nonprofits didn't just launch 2 years ago or 1 year ago or even 5 years ago. And we've had social media platforms, we've had online giving for a decade over now. And a lot of those folks that we acquired at some point, we've lost touch with them because we don't keep up with our address verification. We're not doing our sort of our data cleansing. We have too many dupes in our databases, or our spam reputation, our send reputation is bad, and we end up in spam folders. So I think even if the goal this year for a nonprofit was just to improve your retention, just to improve your reactivation rate, that would be a fantastic goal for you, and I think it's going to be a big trend.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Claire. Mark, bringing this same question over to you, what trends and innovations are you seeing in nonprofit technology, and how can our nonprofits stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, I think Claire really summarized it well. You know, AI and Chat GPT and all of those things, making sure that you have all the different ways that people can donate and support you. You know, beyond just standard credit card, ACH. You know, all DAF giving. You know, cryptocurrency. You know, digital wallets, all of that. But overall theme I'm going to highlight is just overcoming inertia. I think we're seeing a lot of nonprofits finally realizing, a lot of nonprofits were great at technology before, but I think because of the last few years, a lot have realized that their platforms, their services, their systems have been holding them back, and they've been kind of stuck in it with inertia, kind of just rinse and repeat, and this is how we've always done it. But I am seeing more and more of that changing, and more people raising questions, especially with the Great Resignation, right? New people coming in, new blood. It's making them ask questions. Why are we doing it this way? Why are we using these systems? Why are we working so hard when systems can automate a lot of these processes? And it's a great trend to see for sure.
Definitely. I've been hearing that on panels as well, Mark. Appreciate you bringing that up. All right, over to you, Tony. Thoughts on innovation and trends that we've seen in the last few years and staying ahead? Ooh, you are muted, Tony.
Thank you. A couple that I've seen that I think are going to grow are around virtual and augmented reality and user-contributed content in one form or another. Those are the two that I wanted to speak on. In a matter of time, I'm going to pick one and go with virtual and augmented reality. And I'm going to bring it up in a very much for a low-tech reason, I think. Just happens that I'm in a book club this week and we're reading this book. I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it already. And one of the transformations from disruption to impact that they talk about is rethinking volunteer engagement and a shift from feeling that we are providing aid or saving someone to one that is simply more about having real empathy for them. So there's one organization that I'll use as the example. It's called Pencils for Promise, and they build schools in Ghana and Guatemala and Nicaragua. And they wanted to increase donations for an upcoming gala, so they decided to try VR as a way to encourage attendees to give. And they knew if they could show the attendees what it was like to go to one of their schools in that environment, they hypothesized that that would in fact raise donations. And it did so in this non-high-tech manner of just simply raising empathy. So they made VR headsets available, and then people attending their galas could actually feel like what it's like to walk around in one of their schools. I can't imagine that this isn't going to become a trend that we see in more and more places.
Thank you so much, Tony. All right, Michael, want to make sure we hear from you as well. Thoughts on trends and how we can prepare?
I spend all of my time in artificial intelligence, and the key thing that I think I would advise people to think about is making sure that they're proactive on their insights and learning about what's happening with AI. I think ChatGPT has gotten a lot of press, but it's the least important of all the AIs that are out there, honestly. It's a trivial application that has some interesting long-term potential relative to underlying models that are able to help with fundraising, also help to run infrastructure. And those self-learning models can be really important to learn about in terms of ethics, privacy, and bias. So as I think about this, it's really about being proactive with regard to artificial intelligence. There are a couple of great primers I'm happy to refer you to out there. This one is on behavioral economics. I think it's a great way of thinking about what we do in terms of artificial intelligence modeling. But I've got a simple primer on things you need to know about AI. And I think the areas, as I mentioned, privacy, security, bias, and making sure you understand the impact of the data sets you use are things that need to become a core part of the lexicon of every professional fundraiser, because if not, you're abdicating it to your vendors, and that has risk associated with it. So we all need to become consumers of this, like we did of the internet 25 years ago, and of search, after that, and so on and so forth, because the AI is the big breakthrough, and we have to figure out how to adapt it, not just in nonprofit, but in this particular instance, in nonprofit.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. All right, Tony, I'm going to have you start us off with our next question. How can nonprofits ensure that their technology investments align with their mission and strategic goals? And what are some best practices for evaluating and selecting technology solutions? Tony, over to you with that one. Oh, you're muted if you're talking.
Thank you. Found it. I think what they need to do is start with their mission statement. And if they can't draw a straight line between how a new technology is going to align with their mission, then it's one they should pass on. That to me is first and foremost. And then what comes after that is the implementation of it, because it may be a good fit to start with, but how technology is used is just as big a thing as which technology you use. Often we see some organizations that look for a technology piece to be a silver bullet to solve all of the problems. And of course, that is going to be doomed to failure. So it's drawing a direct line to the mission and then measuring back against that. And that can open up some doors, because good technology could also save you some money. But then, of course, how that saves you money, that money or time resource, could also be applied to something else that you do in your mission. And so that I would still consider to be a direct correlation. But if it doesn't start with your mission and draw a straight line, to me, it ought to be avoided.
Great, thank you so much, Tony. Michael, over to you. Thoughts on making sure our technology is aligning with our strategic goals and best practices for evaluating particular solutions?
See, I thought Mark was next in the pecking order here, so now you got me off guard, So, anyways, but seriously, the thing I think about is two things: is we have a structured process to do what Tony was referring to. I really appreciate your comments, Tony. I agree with that. So we use an envisioning session. We don't charge for these services. We do it as part of our consultative engagements. But we use an envisioning session where you look at goals, strategies, org design, tech enablement. Then an architectural design session to make sure that technology is explicitly aligned to business strategy. And then pilot testing of leading edge, not bleeding edge technology. So we're in a situation where you don't want to be the people that are figuring out how it works. You want to figure out how do you become that first 20% after how it works that are adopting something that's proven to work. And so this type of modeling allows us, in terms of the integration, integration of technical capabilities with business strategy is the enabler for success. And there's a proven capabilities around doing this in a nice measured way that allow you to get the impact you're looking for financially and strategically in the marketplace.
Great, thank you so much, Michael. Claire, over to you. Thoughts on making sure our investments align and keeping on top of identifying the correct solutions?
Yeah, I think a lot of your success in the future when it comes to technology, how you allocate your budgets or how you do your investment is going to start with investing in your staff first. So there's two ways to do that. One, whoever is in charge of your technology, your marketing, whatever it is, it will be IT, or development, whoever it is that's overseeing your technology solutions, that they're paid what they're worth. And that's a problem in the nonprofit sector. And the second thing that you can do is you can invest in continuing education for your staff. So you can give them opportunities to take time off and attend free webinars like this, or paid courses, of which there are so many out there. You could get full certifications, or you could do a one-off course, learn about Google Analytics, things like that. So I think that any sort of serious look at investment has to include how we're also self-investing and investing in the people who work at our organization.
Thank you so much, Claire. All right, Mark, I think you know what question's coming your way. Thoughts on how we can make sure we're aligning tech with our strategies?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to all the things that were said already, but yeah, also just creating a list of your requirements, making sure that all the stakeholders involved have had a chance to, put their 2 cents into the list of what they need to do their job to support the mission, right? Always back to that, and make sure that you find the platforms that then support your requirements. Whether or not that's an official RFP process or something more informal, you always have to make sure you start with a list of requirements. Otherwise, let's be honest, it's that time of year, right? NTC is this week, AFP is next week. People are going to a lot of conferences. You're going to see a lot of cool technology. You're going to hear a lot of sales pitches. Well, it might sound great. It might not be anything close to what you need to actually support your mission. So make sure that you are buying technology with your mission and your requirements in mind.
Important guidance. Thank you so much, Mark. Tony, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, just on one addition to what Mark's saying about a list of requirements. be very thoughtful about what you define as a must-have. One of the things that I see more often than not as an RFP is because of so many people have become involved, there are so many things that are listed under a must-have that it really actually convolutes the purpose of having a must-have, which really should be a deal breaker. I get this is an exaggeration, but the way I like to describe it is if I'm buying some software, one of my must-have requirements is that it works in English, because that's the only language I work in. So if it doesn't have that, it's a deal breaker. I want a number of other things, but I really encourage people when they use any sort of Moscow approach to their requirements, stick to the real must-haves when they list them that way, and they'll save themselves some difficulties further down the track.
Great, thank you so much, Tony. So I want to remind our audience that we want to hear from you. Please feel free to start submitting those questions. Otherwise, we'll use the questions that come in from registration, but I will give priority to our live audience members and the questions that you have for this group. We did also have a poll go live if you want to let us know a little bit more about your organization that way. We asked, when selecting technology solutions for your nonprofit, which of the following factors is most important to consider for your organization? We'd love to hear kind of what your priorities are. All right, Michael, I'm going to have you start us off with our next question. In what ways can technology be used to enhance communication and engagement with donors, volunteers, and other stakeholders? And what are some proven strategies for effective outreach and relationship building?
So this is not an area that we spend a ton of time on in the sense of the outreach side of this for the stakeholders per se. But when I look at the first part of the question about the technology to enhance communication, we are core in this area with personalization. So the only thing that works in marketing is insight about the individual, and then being able to express that in a logical way in communications in whatever form. I don't care if it's email or if it's in printed as solicitations or by phone call. And so the most important thing is not just the name of the individual, the first stage of personalization, what it is you're engaging them about that's related to what they've done in the past, and also the areas of insight about what they might do because you've been able to do some modeling that helps you understand the unique position of that individual in their relationship to the nonprofit, and then being in a situation where you're asking them to do things that are aligned well, and specifically financial alignment. This is explicitly what we do, and that personalization of the financial side allows that sense of connection that spurs them to retention in the sense of renewing again and renewing their commitments at an optimal level.
Thank you so much, Michael. Tony, over to you. Thoughts on how tech can be used to enhance communication and engagement?
Yeah, so I'm going to take the communication in the opposite direction. And this is actually communications back into the organization. And it goes back to one of the first things I mentioned early in the session about user contributed content. And in this way, it's very meaningful content. I'm not talking about commenting on blogs or things like that, not that they're not useful, but this is more data-driven content. So there are a couple of apps, and they're not even new, but one called Literati, which a municipality can use to allow citizens to photograph and geotag litter in their community. And then that data then forms a platform for which the municipality can make decisions on what needs to be cleaned up, who they need to maybe reach out to, because it might be that they're finding an absurd quantity of it coming from one supplier, right, or one fast food restaurant, those kinds of things. So it's about engaging people in a way that they become volunteers, but very much in an ad hoc way and only in the moment. But of course, with any engagement, even the smallest bit, whether it's to become a volunteer or a donor, the smallest bit of engagement can lead to become a greater amount of engagement. And the other one was where a park had people walk through it, but then would train some of them to be volunteers and pick invasive weeds along the way. They'd be taught how to identify them. But some of the older walkers became unable to do the weeding, so they could use an app to, again, photograph and geotag weed that needed to be pulled, and then other volunteers could come by very quickly, identify the weeds, pull them out, and move on. So I think we're just going to see all kinds of new additions, new ways that people are going to use user-contributed content.
Thank you so much, Tony. Mark, over to you. Thoughts on how technology can enhance communication and engagement?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to making sure that you have a source of truth for all your constituent data, right? Your CRM, your donor management system, whatever your source of truth is, making sure that everything is funneling into there so you can have a true understanding of how you are, as an organization, are connecting and communicating with your constituents, and equally as important, how they are communicating and connecting with you, how they're interacting with you, so you can appropriately target and communicate with them how and when and about what they want to hear about from you.
Great, thank you so much. Claire, over to you. Thoughts on tech and communication?
All great thoughts so far, and I think I just sort of wanted to jump on and add on a couple things. And the first is that we know that nonprofits are chronically under communicating to their constituents. If you compare to industry, or many other scenarios where we have outreach. If you look at the M&R benchmarks report every year over year, I think that gives you a really good insight into sort of how top performing nonprofits are communicating, also what the response rates are and the conversion rates are. So we tend to hear a lot of pushback, like, oh, we're sending too many emails, when actually your supporters want to hear from you. They want SMSs if they've signed up for them. If they've consented to give you information, they want to hear from you. And so then the second thing to add on to that is that we're not adhering to sort of the marketing rule of 7, which is sort of a well-known principle from the 1930s, that it takes 7 or so times of you seeing a marketing message for you to convert to that action. So we need to diversify the channels on which we're talking to folks. And then when we're doing that, a place that technology can help us is that we know that interactive content is 2 times more effective at getting people to take an action. So that's, you can't make, I mean, you can try and make your direct mail or your street outreach more sort of digitally interactive, but a really cheap way to bring that interaction in is on a digital channel. So as an example, we have a case study, and I'll throw the link to the slides in the chat just now, that we're doing at N10 this week, which is all about interactive content getting people to respond. And what we found a lot of really cool things about that: quizzes, polls, surveys, anything that asks someone their opinion. Folks love that. Especially if it's mission focused. So they know, for instance, they want to save the whales, they love elephants. You already know that about them. When they're served up that kind of interactive content, they want to engage with you. And then to like add on to what Michael was saying earlier, the more information you have about those constituents, you're able to then tailor things to their preferences. They like elephants, they don't like orcas so much, okay, then they're not going to get any orcas, they're going to get elephants in the future. So I think if we just try to remember that we have a lot of opportunity and low cost opportunity in the digital space, especially considering how cheap it is to edit things, test things when we do it digitally. The more interactive we are, the more information we also get about our constituents that helps serve their interests.
Great, thank you so much, Claire. Mark, I'm going to have you start us off with our next question. How can our nonprofits measure the effectiveness and impact of their technology investments? And what are some key metrics and tools to track progress and optimize performance over time?
Yeah, again, I think it starts with ensuring that all your goals for your technology go back to supporting the mission, right? But also, once you have goals for technology, make sure that those are measurable. Something that once it's done, can you measure that, right? Did you receive $100,000 for this campaign? Did you add 25% to your fundraising goal by switching platforms? So make sure your goals are measurable, and then you can use straightforward calculations. The measure cost to raise $1, basically figure out how much the new platform or cost to cost of ownership plus usage, and divide that by the amount raised, and you have a number to work with on how much it costs you. I mean, in simplest terms, but maybe it's as simple as just tracking number of unsubscribes, or donation click-throughs, or donations per appeal. So again, it all goes back to what your goals are, and making sure anytime you're using technology, you have a reason, a goal that supports the mission, and always make sure you keep that in mind. Not to mention those tangible things, but also your staff. Are their lives better? Is there, are they better quality of life, and have more time for other tasks and more enjoyable tasks, and getting rid of some of those rote, boring, repeatable processes. That's what is more valuable than funds raised quite often, right?
Definitely. Thank you so much, Mark. Claire, over to you. Thoughts on measuring effectiveness when you make an investment in technology?
Well, I think an important thing to remember is that you can't sort of implement something new on Tuesday and then go, oh, well, we didn't raise $1 million, next Tuesday. So I think you kind of want to think about these sorts of projects as going year over year, quarter over quarter, and before you are measuring the effectiveness of anything, you have to have all of your benchmarks. So that's where I really think, even if you're not doing a data migration, or even if you're not changing your fundraising platform, knowing your benchmarks is so important. I often talk to a lot of development directors or VPs or folks, and I'll say, well, what percentage of your donations come in online? And they're like, oh, okay, well, I'll go look it up. And it's not a criticism, because we'll have a million different things to do, because I know what it's like to work at a charity and have to also answer the reception phone, and then also, do payroll or whatever it is, right? But if you're going to be looking at improving anything, I hope you've been tracking over at least some period of time what's your average donation amount? How many recurring gifts do you have? What's your likelihood of getting into an inbox if you're emailing folks? Any kind of benchmarks that make sense for your organization, because we've got folks on the call who could be heavily focused on fundraising, like a lot of organizations are, but you could be an advocacy group, and for you, advocacy is more important than fundraising. So you need to know how many letters went to a congressional representative, or whatever it is. Or you could have programmatic goals. Maybe you're looking to have a new database, but in actuality, the biggest goal for your organization is that everyone learns how to do CPR. So how does clean data help you teach people how to do CPR? You're the only person who can make the connection there. Just going around and saying our database is functioning better, does that help you actually reach your goals? So none of that is going to matter unless you know what your goals are right now. So I would say start tracking everything right now and looking at your own internal patterns before you are thinking about doing something new, which I always recommend. Everyone is doing migrations. I love it. I was like, it's springtime. People are getting new platforms and everything. I'm ready for it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Claire. Michael, over to you. Thoughts on measuring the impact of a technology investment and any key metrics we need to consider?
The ones that we are most correlated to are associated with fundraising. So we specifically are looking at some of the ones mentioned earlier. What is the retention rate for the organization? We do it by donor segment. So starting the lowest level up to $10,000 annually. That's we're in the direct response marketing categories in that respect. We look at the giving improvements, both in the median and the average gift rates. These are the things that we think are kind of the hygiene of doing things. But more importantly, because I talked earlier about personalization, we're using AI to determine how much to ask of a specific donor at a specific moment in time. And that's channel optimized. But the other part of it is we know whether or not you should be asking them, because we're modeling donor sentiment. So behavioral economics modeling is modeling donor sentiment. And so we know whether or not you should make the investment in that direct mail piece at a specific moment in time, or they should be emailed, or they should be rested. And so instead of having this concept of somebody else's benchmarks, running an average kind of a benchmarking process, average gives you nothing. The idea is, how do you figure out for this individual what's the right dynamic in engaging them? And we can model that with AI now, and that becomes an important enabler. The second thing under that, I would say, is just simply question everything. I think somebody mentioned earlier, if it was Claire who it was, and I love this concept of question everything, because what I see is in the nonprofit sector, I'm not from the nonprofit sector until the last 4.5, 5 years, in a sense of having an operating role like this. I was with Microsoft before this in a commercial operating role. And what I see is a lack of utilization of zero-based budget management. And so they're not in a situation where they're questioning the status quo and then assessing the agency performance piece by piece by piece, or the internal marketing departments piece by piece by piece, on a regular quarterly review like you do in a commercial business. And I think that deters progress in adopting new capabilities to be able to advance the financial success of the organization. I could spend an hour or two talking about zero-based budgeting, which I will not bore you with, but I love the scrutiny that it provides, and I think that's going to be an imperative in this economic cycle we're heading into.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. I think we might just need a part 2 to get that hour long.
Exactly. I love it.
Awesome. All right, Tony, over to you. Thoughts on measuring effectiveness and impact of tech changes?
Sure. And I come to this with a slightly different perspective. Is it's more about volunteer engagement than donation and donor management. A couple of things that I think are worth echoing a little bit from Mark and Claire. And when Mark mentioned measuring return on investment, I'm a big advocate of that to not only flush out why you should get a technology and determine whether that technology is working for you, but also how you can use it as a management tool to improve the general operations of your organization. So I'll speak to that one first. And it's, I want you to imagine if you're a nonprofit that does reforestation. Well, there's a lot of the data that's collected in the volunteer sector is about how many volunteers, retention rate, and how many hours were contributed. But wait a minute, aren't we about reforestation? There's the data that we need to be collecting. Those other things have some purpose, there's no question about it. But as we put in technology tools, we have to make sure that we're not just guided by what a tool might suggest is worth collecting. And we need to take it back, as I mentioned before, take it right back to our mission and use a tool that helps guide us to measure the impact we're having right related to our specific mission. And benchmarking is, I think, a great way to do that. We can count how many trees we plant before we implement a technology, and then count the number of trees we plant afterwards, or whatever that might be. I think benchmarking is good too when you're trying to make a case for adopting technology. And unfortunately, as a few people have mentioned, sometimes expenditures in a nonprofit are hard to come by. So sometimes we've got to prove why putting a technology is worth putting into place. And one of the things that I think nonprofits need to do is value their staff time. So as a really simple example, if a volunteer engagement professional reports on their volunteer program in such a way that they spend 4 hours every week putting together reports, and they're paid a wage of $25 an hour, that's $5,000 a year that is being spent to do something because they've got to piece together different spreadsheets where the right piece of technology would just deliver it on demand. So we really need to measure the return on investment in hindsight, but also use it to measure it going forward to help put some technology into place.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Tony. Michael, over to you. This is going to be the final question before we jump to our audience questions. How can nonprofits balance the desire for innovation and cutting-edge technology with a need for stability, reliability, and security in their tech infrastructure? And what are some strategies for mitigating any risk?
Now, for a number of reasons, I treat the nonprofit sector like I would treat insurance or banking in terms of security and stability. And you don't want to have operational departure that creates all kinds of ill will with your donors or any of the services that you're trying to provide to the people who are dependent upon you. So I think this is a really critical question. And I think the aspect of it is to rely on case studies and referrals, which I think are really imperative. And the nice thing about the nonprofit sector is people are very open. It's the opposite of some of the commercial sector trends, which is a blessing. And I think that being able to make sure you also fully understand what's involved in doing something. What I have found personally, it is better for us to do the work for our clients than to continuously try to get them to do the work. And it was alluded to earlier, because you may need staff training, or maybe people leave and you've got to rehire. So you have operational risk by having those kinds of transitions. And if you have a centralized pool of subject matter experts that can deliver really high fidelity capabilities in modeling to support the success of a nonprofit, and do that with no operational issue or no use of privacy, or PII, I should say, then I think it allows you to be in a situation where you do it very seamlessly and without disruption. But I think the onus is actually on the decision maker in the nonprofit sector to just to ask enough questions, get enough color to understand the full implications of adopting something new. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michael. Tony, over to you. Thoughts on balancing a desire for innovation with also mitigating risk?
I'm going to start with prioritizing cybersecurity and data privacy. We've talked about it needing to fit your mission, but to an underscore to the mission, everyone really needs to ensure that they are protecting the data of their constituents. And if you want to be selfish about it, it's not for the constituents' sake, and I think Michael was kind of alluding to this, it's to the integrity of the organization's sake that you need to do that. So that needs to be one of those must-haves when you're determining whether or not to use a technology, that they have an adequate security footprint. And then you can't just rely on them. You need to adopt internal processes and policies that also are always top of mind in terms of cybersecurity and privacy. So there has to be internal training, not just about how to use the platform, but what's PII? How do I have to treat that information differently than other information? Why can't I just call you and ask you to reset my password over the phone? Question that we had that needs that kind of internal training, because that's going to protect them. I've got a few more, but I think that's the most important one I want to go with.
Thank you so much, Tony. Mark, over to you. Thoughts on making sure that we're not taking too many risks when we're having an interest in new technology?
Yeah, I like to think about the 3 P's of ensuring you have a foundation. Price, price, price. Oh wait, no, that's the Colonial Penn commercial. The 3 P's in this case are the platform. What tech have you got, right? Make sure you have a list of what technology you have, and again, looking it back and how it's supporting your organization, and is there overlap, and because quite often organizations, different departments will have a specific initiative that they have to make a quick decision and run with, and they get the approval, and all of a sudden you have a new technology in your stack, right? A new system. So be aware of your platforms. The other P is people, right? Who is using it? Are they properly trained? Can they be up trained in technology to better understand how it's all used and be efficient with it? And the last P is process, right? Is that documented? Are you training newcomers to how to use the technology? Are you asking people on the way out, what they thought of your processes and your organization as a whole, and really make sure that foundation is in place before you build on it, and always keeping security top of mind in anything that you do.
Thank you so much, Mark. Claire, anything to add in terms of balancing risk?
Yeah, I think that that the real risk is in the status quo, in doing something that you've done for 5. That's where the real risk is, because I'm not sure how we got this perception. Maybe some of the news articles are a bit spooky or something like that, that new things are more risk prone for nonprofits and charities. Because as an example, if you're an organization and you're hearing all crypto, whatever, and you decide, okay, I'm going to go get a cryptocurrency wallet, or I'm going to use one of the many third-party platforms that allow me to take crypto donations, and then anyone who holds cryptocurrency can make a donation to me. There's no risk for you. You're just adding extra donation options for your supporters. So that's not a risky thing for you, even though it seems new and it seems a little bit like, ooh, what is this crypto? Same as if, I'm going to start doing YouTube shorts and I'm going to have 20 seconds of video or whatever, right? I think there's less risk to your organization than there would be in not communicating with folks. Where the risk is in things that I see all the time, which is donor supporter information in Excel spreadsheets. People with credit card slips, still using credit card slips and then filed like just on people's desks and stuff like that. Pledge sheets for third-party events that have cash or checks just kind of like lying around or whatever it happens to be. There are all these reasons why that occurs. And so again, not a criticism, but that's where the real risk is. If you haven't even tested your online donation form in the last few years and you don't actually know what the donor experience is, the risk is in you not having any idea why what you've done with your old platform of archived constituents that you don't access anymore. Like, where's that data stored? Who has access to that data? All of that stuff I think is more high risk. So I find that a lot of the stuff that we tend to talk about as being cool and new, and predictive modeling to help boost suggested giving levels, AI to chatbots to like help people when they're on your website and things like that, are a lot less risky than some of our day-to-day practices. And I just say that because I know everyone's got kind of a dodgy Excel spreadsheet somewhere on their desktop, So just saying, if we could kind of lock that down, that's where the real risk is, I think.
Great, thank you so much, Claire. All right, we are going to jump into our audience questions. And Tony, I'm going to have you start us off with this first one. Someone asked, what's the best way to get particularly volunteers 55 plus involved or engaged with donor and volunteer technology? I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'd love to hear more.
I'm not sure if I'm the right person to ask because I'm not that old. Oh, wait, no, I've been that old for a decade almost. And I don't know. We used to get that question asked a lot. We've been doing this for 20 years. So you can imagine 20 years ago, how do you get older people involved was a big question. I've got to say that it's a diminished question over time. But some strategies that have been in play before is find a younger volunteer that would like to coach them on the technology. I do remember getting an email passed on to me from one of our first client, actually, who an older volunteer emailed her to say thank you for introducing me to this online platform. He'd never been on the internet, imagined he would never be on the internet. By then showing them the volunteer portal, he then went on to do other things like communicate with his kids through Facebook or other perhaps things like that. So I guess mentor, go slow, and show them the advantage of doing so, because inevitably, much like online banking, does anybody here not bank online today? Eventually, people do see the light that it is clearly to their benefit to participate that way.
Thank you so much, Tony. Anyone else want to jump in terms of getting older generations involved with technology? Nope. All right, we can move to the next question then. We had a question come in that I'm going to be honest, I am not a nonprofit technical expert, so I do not know if this fits in anyone's purview. So I'm going to ask the question.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, that question from Ben, Michael, is that one you want to answer?
Sure.
Fantastic.
Well, when I was looking at this, at one point of particular interest, in the middle of the question is automating donation entry form for the physical mail, if I understand it correctly. And there are plenty of tools out there that do a couple of things. One of them is determining, how much you should be asking and whether or not you should be asking. That should be a part of your direct mail process to lower your cost per dollar raised while improving the profitability or the donation amount that comes in from direct mail. These kind of capabilities are omni-channel, so they're not only when direct mail. I personally believe the direct mail is extremely critical to any fundraising process. It's one of those 4 pillars, if you will. You have to have digital, you got to have online, you have to have an account, you have to have social media. But the anchor point always continues to be direct mail. We've done a lot of experimentation around this. But you can use artificial intelligence to do the behavioral economic modeling to make these assessments of the donor and then optimize that personalization. And you don't have to get into extensive coding. This is like a thing you can do in less than a week. You're just simply tapping into, core capability into like a Blackbaud platform, for instance. It's not a big deal. It's not like you're building an application from the ground up. Okay.
Thank you so much, Michael. We had a question come in that, Mark, I'm going to have you start us off with. What would you say to a nonprofit that invests in new technology but then resists fully implementing it?
What are you doing? No, I mean, it depends on why, but we see this quite often where someone will buy a suite of tools or a specific, point solution that's best in class and use it for a specific reason, but, ignore or not fully utilize a lot of the functionality because, again, they get stuck, with inertia and just kind of repeating what they've been doing. And the key is, investing that you've already invested in the product, invest the time to test things out, do a little bit of A/B testing, try something new. It's, the old adage, try and fail. That's the best way to know you're doing things right, is to do it wrong. Because 9 times out of 10 it'll probably be right, and until you are using all the features within your fundraising capabilities, you're probably not reaching your maximum and not allowing your staff to reach their maximum.
Great, thank you so much, Mark. This aligns actually well with the question that came in via registration as well. So Claire, I think I might pass this over to you. But the question asks essentially how to handle when you know that technology would benefit your nonprofit, but you're having a hard time getting everyone on board, be it leadership or boards. So kind of making your case that it really is time to implement some new tech.
Well, okay, so obviously, the ideal scenario would be you have some sort of Spartacus moment where you just kind of, you go and you present to everyone and you somehow convince them, or it's like a few good men type moment where the one naysayer is like shouted down or whatever. But I find practicality, everyone's going to be resistant to change unless they're in that sort of mindset to change. So one of the things that I find, that maybe this is not something you would put in a book or whatever, but I find a lot of nonprofits and charities are highly interested in and highly motivated in what other people in their space are doing, and that any sorts of examples from orgs that are bumping up against their org in the same space. So say you're like a cat shelter, and the cat shelter in the town next over is doing something really interesting. That seems to get board members a little bit more activated. So one example that I use all the time is when you're thinking about something really simple like digital advertising. It sometimes seems a little scary to kind of dip into that. But with Meta, Meta being Facebook and Instagram, there is the Facebook or Meta ad library where anybody can go to completely look at all the advertisers and see what they're spending, see what demographics they're targeting, see the copy that they use, the content that they use. And I found whenever I talk about digital advertising, that seems to be the thing that interests nonprofit professionals the most, because then they're able to go and see, oh, the organization that we not compete with, but like is similar to, that we might admire or that we might be keeping an eye on, is doing this, and I can see exactly what they're doing and what the budget is, and all of that seems to be very powerful in helping people make a case. So I think that is one thing that can help. If you can demonstrate how other people are doing it, it sort of normalizes it. In psychology, the concept is called social proof, right? So if there's 1 million reviews on something, we want to buy it because other people have told us, as opposed to the marketer themselves. So I think that would be really effective. And one thing I want to add on, Janet, I can see your comment in the chat. I also teach digital fundraising at a college here in Toronto. And I completely agree with you about older students being more comfortable with technology. I think just anyone who was physically alive in the 90s sort of has that experience of doing a little bit of HTML, making your own kind of blog, having a MySpace, or having all these other things, and all the technology pieces seem to be connected in their mind. How this has this has a foundation behind it. This causes this. If this, go to whatever, right? So there seems to be a good handle on it, which might be missing a little bit in Gen Z, who has always had the magic and never had any of the programming. So I do find some of my younger students seem to be baffled on things like how to make an Excel into a CSV or something like that, where I have to point out that there are different file formats of things, and everything on their phone just works perfect. So, they might not have to consider that there's something behind it. Not to put down the younger generations, because, I love them.
Thank you so much, Claire. Unfortunately, I do have to start wrapping us up, so we're not going to get to address any other audience questions. If we didn't get to yours, I'm so sorry. Please join us for future panel sessions, and we'll try to address it, or reach out to any of your panelists. I know people like to hear from you, so definitely send those questions in. I do have one final question, so we make sure we hear from each of our panelists a final time. And with this final question, I'm going to have you all start looking into the future, kind of trying to predict what's going to happen. And Mark, I'm going to have you start us off. What do you see as the future of technology for nonprofits, and how can nonprofits really make sure they're getting ahead today?
Informed, right? Be informed. You don't have to know everything. Again, try and fail and try again. In insight into who their constituents are and how they want to be communicated with. Know your constituents, know what's going on in the industry, know what your peers are doing, have targeted communications coming from an informed place so that people aren't receiving messages that just sound like a robot talking to them, like you're talking to them like anybody that you talk to, a brand new constituent, someone that's been with you for 20 years and volunteering and donating and attending your events. They shouldn't get the same message, right? But I guess the overall theme I would say is technology upskilling, right? Just learning more, getting more involved. I think we get a nonprofit space gets a bad rap for being way behind the for-profit space, and yeah, I guess in generalities that's true. But I see a lot of really cutting-edge technology and forward-thinking nonprofits and consultants out there, and lean on those folks if you aren't one of those folks, and if you are one of those folks, share your knowledge.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. Claire, over to you. Thoughts on the future for tech for nonprofits and how we can get ahead today?
Sure. Just on like very quickly, and I think as a sort of a minimal, I think I would really love to see the checkout experience for nonprofits for making a donation, a purchase, or a registration, or anything like that get much closer to what people are used to experiencing in any kind of e-commerce. Right now, there's a disconnect. It takes longer to make a donation. Sometimes there is the follow-up experience or the experience giving isn't as good as it is when we buy leggings from Lululemon or whatever. And we want to at least kind of get close to parity where it's as easy and feels as good to make a donation as it would be to buy something online, which is usually inherently more complicated.
Thank you so much, Claire. Michael, over to you. Thoughts on the future and how we can get ahead today?
And I think about technology as a core enabler of success of a nonprofit. And if you start out without having that orientation, you're in the wrong place. And so I think the first thing is having a really good board that can help set direction with the executive staff, and then make sure that strategy is clear and that you understand the underpinnings of the core things that have to happen in order for that strategy to be a real success or a reality. And then objectively look at what capabilities you have and ensure that technology is the best that you can have for those capabilities. And then it's not about trying to force somebody into making a change. It's everybody in pursuit of the success of the organization in the fulfillment of its mission.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael. Tony, over to you. Thoughts on the future and how we can get ahead today?
Sure. I'm hopeful that it is going to become easier for nonprofits to invest in technology and close that gap that I think Mark was alluding to. And I think that it's going to come about because some nonprofits are going to embrace technology really well. And as much as nonprofits might like to think they don't compete with other nonprofits, I believe there is some level of competition for donors' dollars, volunteers' time. And so those that just simply do a better job of operating are going to survive more easily, especially throughout our challenging times the future brings us, than ones that aren't quicker to evolve. I think the pandemic has taught us that. And I believe that people are coming around to the notion that administrative money is still good money well spent. And the idea of keeping the percentage of a donation that goes to administration as low as possible, and remember, technology is generally grouped under administration, is penalizing to an organization. And I think the world is changing. People are waking up that money well invested in administration is for the greatest good of the organization.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Tony. All right, with that, we have reached the end of our panel. I want to give a big thank you to our panelists. I know if we were in an in-person setting, there would be a round of applause. So just know I'm sending that to you emotionally through the screen today. I do also want to give a big thank you to our audience. Thank you for your time. Hope you learned something that you can take with you in your amazing work, and hope you will join us for future NX